6, 7, 8. Yep, 9. So that gets us to a quorum. Okay, so Kitty, have you started recording? Oh, yep, you did.
Yep.
Okay. Well, thank you. My name is Mark Nod. I am the chair of the Vermont Citizens Advisory Committee on the Future of Lake Champlain. Welcome. It's April 11th to our monthly meeting. The agenda today has been shared, but we'll start with welcome and introductions. It looks like we've got some folks that haven't been on before, so we'll be sure we get a chance to introduce them in addition to our committee members. We'll have some public comments and then quick action item on review and approval of the draft March 14th minutes. And then we'll move into a presentation on follow-up from our last meeting. It'll be Meg Modley with some discussion around the New York State Canal Corporation and DEC response to the significant concerns about the Ron Goby and the Hudson and finding its way up through the canal system. And then we'll have a presentation from Scott Sanderson at Conservation Law Foundation regarding their petition for corrective action or withdrawal of the NPDES program for agricultural water quality permitting. And then Lauren will update us on Streamwise, and we'll wrap up with planning for the next few meetings leading up into our July or August retreat as we move towards that. So let's see. I'm just going to take a quick look at who's joined us that may need introduction before we get started. I see Jackie Folsom. Jackie, do you want to introduce yourself? And if you have any public comments, now would be a time to make any comment.
Oh, super. Thank you very much, Mr. Nod. My name is Jackie Folsom. I am the Legislative Director for the Vermont Farm Bureau, and I have been on these calls just maybe under cover of silence, but I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak. I'm speaking, I realize you haven't talked about the petition yet, but I would just like to go on record on behalf of Vermont Farm Bureau to say that we absolutely do not support this petition, and it's probably no surprise to any of the folks who are supporting it. Vermont Farm Bureau's policy is that anything that touches agriculture remains under the Agency of Agriculture's enforcement regulations and auspices, and that's where we would expect it to remain. I also just thought it was interesting that there several mentions were made in the petition and also on the PR that's gone out about the petition regarding the fact that it would help the farmers. And my thought would be that it would probably be more helpful if the petition had asked to have all discharges under the auspices of the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, rather than try to put everything under A&R. I appreciate having the opportunity to give you the Vermont Farm Bureau's position, and I look forward to the conversation later on. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jackie. I don't think I see anybody else that hasn't been a regular guest or needs introduction. The only other public members I see are Cree Linelec. Cree, do you have any public comment before we get started?
No, not really, but except to really thank Scott for all of the work that he has done on the petition, and that I feel it's high time given the history. Thank you.
Thank you, Cree. Okay, then let's move to our action item. Katie shared the draft March 14th meeting summary. Is there a motion to approve those? Wayne, a second?
Hi, this is Denise.
Thanks, Denise. Any discussion for edits or comments on them? Lori?
Yes, thank you. Apologies not being able to get this out beforehand, but I think it's on page 3, the second bullet regarding aquatic invasive species. my comment about the vector for most aquatic invasive species was it's just missing a line whose point of origin is known. I can pass these comments on to Katie specifically.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, I think I found that with Teams or Zoom that it's easier just to check for abstentions. Any abstentions to approving the minutes as edited by Lori? Otherwise, all those in favor? Great. I think we can just move on. Oh, Lori, did you have something, or Carrie?
No, I just was saying aye.
Oh, hi.
And I was just raising my hand.
Aye, not high.
Okay, so let's just get going. We'll move on to the round Gobi response. Meg, if you're ready.
Sure. This is going to be a verbal update. I don't have a formal presentation. Between the last meeting where we spoke and where we are today, I'll give you a quick update. The last week of March, the New York State Canal Corporation and New York State DEC released a joint press release that had identified a number of steps that they were going to work on together, and it included a very lengthy quote from our director, Howe, at the Basin Program about what the Lake Champlain Basin Program and our Rapid Response Task Force is doing to contribute to the effort. So for the early detection monitoring, we have a contract and a quality assurance project plan in place, and USGS New York is ready to hit the water to start collecting environmental DNA and trawling samples from the confluence of the Mohawk and the Hudson north up into the Champlain Canal and into the southern end of Lake Champlain too, at critical junctures that we've identified to help inform a rapid response plan specific for Round Gobi that is under development, again, with the Canal Corps, DEC, and a few members of our Rapid Response Task Force will be working together on that early detection monitoring front. The press release also included a number of mitigation measures that the Canal Corporation and DEC were exploring to implement, which included double draining and limited lockings through the system for the season. We're learning more about those proposed technologies. Double draining a system basically means suctioning the water out of the canal lock before a watercraft motors into it, and doing that sort of twice in a northerly direction to try and flush organisms present in that lock should Round Gobi be present out of it. We have had some follow-up discussions with the Army Corps of Engineers and others that have a few reservations about the efficacy of that control technology, but we are looking at it still is a tool that could be utilized. So we're going to hear if the Canal Corps will move forward with that technology. And then limited lockings, we're still learning. They're thinking of scheduling lockings on a certain hour basis instead of just on demand. So those are proposed mitigation measures for now. We have been interviewing candidates for our AIS outreach specialist position that will be housed at Warrensburg within the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Been on the phone all day doing interviews. So we're hopeful that we can snatch a good candidate and get them in place before the field season starts. Again, this is a position that's co-funded by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Lake Champlain Basin Program through New England Interstate Water Pollution Control Commission, and the individual would sit in New York State DEC and be supervised by our Erin Vinnie Volrath, who is our New York DEC Lake Champlain Basin Program Coordinator. So that is well underway. In addition, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has applied to internal funds to expand early detection monitoring using environmental DNA for a suite of invasive species that we're concerned about. We'll let you know the results of that internal application, but that's really exciting because it could expand our data collection to address all different types of species we're concerned about. So quagga mussel, snakehead, Asian carp, you name hydrilla, the other ones that we're worried about getting here. So that would be a really useful additional tool. Dr. Eric Howe and I have been in communications and presentations with the Hudson Estuary group, as well as the Erie Canalway group, that have some articulated concerns about economic impacts to the system if any mitigation measures would be implemented. So we've been sharing our response process and the action items that we're taking, and looking at addressing all the different pathways that could be possible for introduction. We continue to work with Quebec on the Richelieu River population. We're focusing messaging for bait bucket transfer for both intentional or possibly unintentional introductions in terms of how to identify, who to report to, those kinds of questions. The outreach specialist that we hire will be doing a lot of one-on-one outreach to businesses, stakeholders, local community members along the canal corridor, so that we're raising a lot of awareness about the round goby, but also about the need for the Champlain Canal barrier project to move forward for all invasive species in the Champlain Canal. We did hear from the Army Corps of Engineers that the report has been finalized and they're working on a press release. So we expect a press release will come out in the next few weeks with the report accessible, which will be great. That's the phase 1 study. I think there's been a lot of interviews, a lot of talks. The State of the Lake Fishery meeting occurred on a Saturday. I think it was March 26th or something. There was a focus on round goby and possible impacts from introduction that Sean Good from Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department and Ellen Marsden and myself delivered. But there's been a number of different interviews and avenues by which we've been communicating concerns about preventing round goby from getting into Lake Champlain. And I know Sean Good has been tagged to write an article for the Lake Champlain International, is going to do an article for their derby this summer that will focus on round goby and impacts. So where we are right now is we're focusing on education and outreach messaging, getting that position filled. We're ready to start collecting early detection, monitoring information, and we're looking forward to more meetings with the DEC and Canal Corporation on exploring different mitigation measures. The last thing I'll add is when we met with Army Corps navigation team out on the Chicago Sanitary Ship Canalway, they brought a number of experts who have been evaluating impacts of bubble barriers, acoustic barriers, double draining, electric barriers, many different mitigation measures, and they have a lot of science and research that they can bring to the table. And I think that was really informative for the Canal Corporation to hear, and did impact and adjust how they were thinking about their possible response actions in this first field season. But I think there's still a lot of opposition or concern to impacting navigation of the system. So we will see how it continues to unfold. And I might ask Eric if he has anything else to add.
Thanks, Meg. I think that was a good summary, and I'll let people answer questions or ask questions, and we can try to answer them.
Go ahead, Lori.
Thank you, Meg, for all your hard work on this. I know you've been doing the press circuit and just doing a lot of research on this, and we very much appreciate the effort and the update and all your work on aquatic invasive species. I'm wondering if you can clarify about the double drainage. You said that would be done twice. Is that twice during the season, and any sense of time on that?
Thanks. Yeah, so we are still learning about the technology, Lori, but the idea is that for watercraft that would be traveling northward through the system for lock C7 and C8 in particular, that they would drain the lock and try and flush it twice before watercraft went into the lock system to move northward through the canal. The expectation or the assumption is that round goby would enter the system from the south, from the Hudson, be swimming up and challenging that lock barrier, and when it's opened would try to swim in. So the idea is that they would flush the lock before traveling northbound traffic would go into the lock, and they would do that twice to try and get organisms out. There is concern that this is a bottom dwelling species. It's a benthic fish species with a virtual suction cup on its belly, so that it may try to avoid that flushing or seek refuge. You can't entirely flush a lock system. You can't drain it dry. So it's a good effort. I don't know. We just don't know how effective it would be. So we're looking into that. And I think the rapid response plan for Round Goby specifically that's being developed, we're giving New York State DEC the lead on that to work with Canals and a few select members of our rapid response task force to really look at, if we find them here, then what, and try and all get on the same page about action items that would be taken to contain the organism if it's found, close to or within the system.
Sure, thank you. I have follow-up questions, but I know other people have questions as well, so I'll get back in the back end of the queue and but keep my hand raised.
Mark, you want to direct traffic, or do you want?
Yeah, I'll do that. Go ahead, Wayne.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Megan, just a question more out of curiosity. I'm just kind of interested in the timing of this. It really kind of came to a head a month ago, and I'm not trying to be critical. I'm sure this is probably intent of the purpose of this rapid response, but it just seems hard to react to this. I mean, I totally support the preventive actions, but the boating season is starting here pretty quickly, and it's awful hard to react to that. Sounds like everybody's trying to figure out what should be done, what can be done, and what the impacts of that are. Is this something that was on everybody's radar, 6 months ago or last fall, I guess, just to provide some more time to, put a plan together and, get everybody involved. So again, I'm not trying to be critical of my question here. It's more just out of curiosity. It just seems like the timing is pretty challenging here, I guess, with the boating season coming up quickly.
Thanks. Yes, it is challenging. This is not new. We thought that actually we were more concerned about an introduction to the north with the Round Goby in the Richelieu River near the confluence of the St. Lawrence Seaway. But what has happened just in the last 2 years, the Round Goby has moved through sort of the eastern half of the Erie Canal system faster than was anticipated. It was detected at the confluence of the Mohawk and Hudson River, and no mitigation measures were installed before it reached the Hudson system. So New York has watched this happen, and it's unfortunate because now it's in the Hudson system. And I think it was less so on the Lake Champlain community's radar until it hit that confluence of the Mohawk and the Hudson rivers, at which point, there was some publication and some discussion, and our rapid response task force started meeting last fall to talk about economic and ecological possible impacts and looking at what other interim measures could be taken. And I think that's when the Nature Conservancy sort of started to develop their advocacy campaign to talk about closing one of the locks on the southern end of the system, because our long-term goal has always been an all taxa approach in the Champlain Canal, and this is a long-term plan that we're aiming for, because Round Goby is the issue of today, right? But next year it could be a different species, and we're going to be in response mode all over again if we don't find a barrier that's going to allow for recreational traffic to continue to use the system, but won't allow them to move from the Hudson into the Champlain watershed. So it is a bit of an emergency response, and I think it's taken a little bit of time for the Canal Corporation to really come to the table and to think about short-term measures that could be taken to prevent this organism from moving through the system, just because they couldn't really turn away from all of the political pressure of folks being concerned about the issue.
Yep. And part of the reason I was asking this question is I think collectively as a group, we probably could have been more effective if we had maybe talked about this when we were putting our action plan together. We did have that category, but I think we could have been more kind of specific to this issue, and that allows us to get that in front of the different committees and stuff in January. So I think we just, in the future, I think we can be more helpful, kind of more effective, I guess, maybe if we, been able to get this in maybe a couple months ago anyways. So, yep.
I think it's also, for better or for worse, Round Goby has raised awareness. It's rung a bunch of alarm bells with different stakeholders in the Lake Champlain watershed that were not rung by different invasive species, maybe because they didn't have such a diversity of negative impacts. So Round Goby is one that we know has had some pretty negative impacts in other lakes, and it's hard to garner the support for the barrier on the Champlain Canal when there isn't something sort of immediately threatening the situation. But we will continue to work on that all taxa barrier, and happy to talk about or appreciate any support for obtaining that ultimate goal.
Good. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Meg.
Yeah, well, Wayne, I think I may have been neglectful in not sort of relaying. I know that we heard some Round Goby updates at the executive committee and steering committee levels over the last 6 months or more, and some alarm with how quickly it had progressed from west to east into the Hudson and then beginning downriver on the Hudson. And I think the concern was it approaching that confluence where the Hudson meets the southern end of the canal system of concern at C7 at Fort Edward, which there you go uphill a little ways before the peak and then downhill into the Champlain basin. So, and I think the other concern and more focused concern was for us to press DEC to increase their budget and staffing and stop allowing the decline of the state aquatic invasive species program. And so I think just as a matter of priority, I think we were more focused on that than something that's essentially wholly within the confines of New York State government and the Canal Corporation. But it has raised a lot of awareness, and I think reasonably effectively caught people's attention. It's really concerning, though. Any other questions? I have a couple, but I want to give everybody else a chance to go. Go ahead, Lori.
Yeah, thank you. So, Meg, I'm wondering if you can talk about I thought part of the review was also going to include more of an investigation of recreational use on the canal too, because those numbers are tightly held by the Canal Corporation, and when we've tried to get them in the past, it's not been an easy job, and it does have bearing. And so I had heard that there was going to be an assessment of recreational use, as well as a look at, an updating of the value of the fishery, and that would help us better evaluate the potential impact for Round Goby. And also, I'm wondering if you feel like this is truly accelerating the very delayed action on the permanent solution, all taxa barrier on the Champlain Canal, and just encourage that we as a CAC get regular updates on this so we can stay informed and use our avenues in the action plan to keep things moving forward as best we can.
Okay, those are a lot of big questions. So in terms of the data of the usage on the Champlain Canal, there was limited information shared during our phase 1 study from the Canal Corporation to the Army Corps of Engineers, and that report, again, we hope will be out in the next few weeks. It's limited. I do understand that the lock tenders collect information, but it may not be super specific, meaning exact like vessel length and type, and that there was an interest in collecting more specific data to be able to answer those questions. I don't think that data has been collected yet. I think that's what we need to hold the Canal Corps accountable to collecting. That's not something we have much influence over otherwise. Then we need better data because they haven't been able to provide that data very quickly or readily to folks who have asked for it. So I hope that we'll get more data on that. The second part of your question was about a study on the economic valuation of our fishery, I believe. I do not understand that that's a study that's underway as a result of this effort. There is another evaluation of the fishery that's being pursued through a separate project the timing of which we have to look at a little bit more closely, but I don't know if it's going to happen in time enough to influence the Round Goby specific situation. It may happen in time to influence the all taxa barrier situation. The third part of your question was, do we think that the Round Goby has really elevated the need for the all taxa barrier approach sufficiently, in so many words? I have never had so many conversations with different types of stakeholders about Round Goby and about the Champlain Canal barrier feasibility study. So I think that it is a catalyst for additional stakeholder involvement and discussion and communication. I think that's all very important. The problem is I don't know where Round Goby are. Our early detection monitoring efforts will be underway. So I can't really say if the measures that are being proposed by DEC and canals are going to be effective or sufficient if Round Goby were to be found in the canal. But they are working on it, which is positive.
Okay, Meg, thanks again. I have a couple of just quick questions, clarifications. You talked about expanded eDNA. Did you say that was Fish and Wildlife? U.S. Fish and Wildlife?
It's U.S. Fish and Wildlife applying to internal U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service regional funding for expanding the early detection monitoring that we're looking at for Round Goby to include a suite of other species and other sampling sites to collect that data from.
Terrific. And then I did have a question about the number of users and continuing, I've tried to find information on, what the impact would be for folks through traveling from Lake Champlain up or down the canal, and I just can't seem to find much of anything. And I know there were some numbers thrown around, but they were in the last couple of years, and I just don't think that COVID recreational counts are very meaningful for consideration on impact. And I'd really like to know that. I have had a lot of feedback from marine operations folks, and you guys may have had some in your presentation with Mike O'Brien and the that event earlier. I guess that was just last week. What their impacts are. The general sense I was, if you got to block it, when we'll figure out a way to work around and haul around the locks wherever it's appropriate. I guess the last question I had was, is the coordinated public education campaign that they discussed, is that primarily the Basin Program Aquatic Invasive Species Specialist, or are they ramping up within the Canal Corp, within DEC to do a really comprehensive educational campaign up and along the canal system?
So I don't have the exact answer for that. I think initially the response is yes, that was the AIS outreach position that the Basin Program and U.S. Fish and Wildlife is supporting. However, I think DEC does have the Canal Corporation and select members of the Lake Champlain Basin Program's Rapid Response Task Force will be working together, and it sounds like I think they will be, the idea is we're going to have consistent messaging, and that will be shared through the different agencies. So everything that we're working on, we want to make sure works for all of the organizations so that we can have consistent messaging along the canalway. I am unaware of additional resources within the state or the Canal Corporation at this point in time to work on those outreach campaigns, but I think they would bring their regular channels to the table.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for Meg or Eric while we have them? Well, again, Meg and Eric, thanks again so much for really putting so much energy and so much leadership on this throughout both the state and with federal partners, because it obviously came quickly and the advocacy moved to get us to a point where we can maybe finally move forward. I think I was expecting the canal study to come out a month or more ago.
Or last year.
Or
yeah.
I was giving them a little more benefit, but I really thought it would come out sooner so that it could be part of our conversation. It would give us a stronger direction. So
yes, and it would have been helpful for our budget process as well if it had come out in December when it was supposed to.
Yeah, and again, it's really concerning because it literally is right there on the doorstep wanting to climb up into the canal system. So let me see, I just was going to turn on the conversation. I saw someone.
Oh, Eric was putting some things in the chat, I think.
Thanks, Eric.
Yeah, we did have a conversation with the folks at the Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor last week, Friday, I guess it was.
Mm-hmm.
And they directed, we asked them the same questions that you all are still are asking, and they directed us to this web page and that link that I just shared with you, which contains a link to a report that was published, I think it was in 2017. That's what I remember reading this morning. I've already forgotten what year it was published, but that gives you, if you dig deep in there, you can tease out some Champlain related information. It's kind of, there's most of it is they touting a $1.3 billion economic benefit to the communities along the entire New York State Canal Way system from Buffalo to Whitehall, basically. And if you look at the report, you'll see that pretty quickly that most of that $1.3 billion is not in the Champlain Canal system.
Yeah, I saw that and was really trying to tease out the Champlain Canal. It seems like so much of the infrastructure and other resources are invested in the rest of the canal system, Owego, and it just strikes me, except for a few hundred boats probably that are through passers, are Canadian boats and some U.S. boats or Vermont boats, Canadian and New York, that go down through the system, and maybe a little bit of recreational fishing up and back and forth. It's hasn't been that active of utilization. I know there's a lot of investment in the towns along the way and hopeful, but it'd be nice to have better detail on that so we could have a far better read on what the impacts are. So thanks again. Appreciate you bringing the time and expertise today. And I think we're close to on track with our schedule. Next up is
Mark, before we shift gears, I just wanted to share with everyone that the New York CAC did put forth a nearly identical resolution to the one that you all put forth at the last meeting, and that was distributed to Governor Hochul, the Canal Corps, DEC, and various elected officials in New York last week.
Thanks, Katie, for reminding me of that. I have been in some conversations with Pierre at OBVBM, and he's referred us, and again to I think to Eric. I saw a email today to Covinbar, I think it is, which is the Richelieu River Watershed Organization, essentially the equivalent. And so we'll do some follow up. He thought that Sylvain there would have more specifics about utilization from Canadian or Canadian/New York users from up in the Rouse's Point area who might be through travelers and what their impacts might be. And then again, downstream the Richelieu. So we'll follow up with that when we've have better information.
That'd be great.
Thanks, Meg. Any other questions? Okay, so now let's move on to our next agenda item. We invited Scott Sanderson, the interim director to the Food and Agriculture Program at Conservation Law Foundation, just to give us a presentation on the petition that was delivered to the EPA, I think just after our last meeting, and just provide us with a sense of the where, how, why this petition. As you all know, for most of the last decade, the CAC in our action plan has requested the legislature revoke, adjust, do something with the MOU for the shared jurisdiction on agricultural water quality permit enforcement. And as you know, this year we took a slightly different approach and essentially just asked the administration and the agencies just to fix whatever was necessary in order for it to serve the farming community, the lake, and everyone better. So in the meantime, this petition has come forward. We asked Scott to give us a presentation on it, and I'm hopeful that between now and our next meeting, there'll be some action from the EPA, and we might be able to then have the Vermont agency, DEC, and Ag, Food and Markets to maybe present what their position and what their responses might be. Part of our follow-up from our action plan legislative day that we had hoped to have some follow-up from was to get a more detail from the administration, and particularly the Deputy Chief of Staff for Governor Scott, on exactly what the process was that Brittany promised that they were actively fixing and repairing the failures in the program. So we'll start here and move on to more hopefully at our next meeting. So Scott, I'll just let you take it away from here with Katie for any other technical support.
Fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to try to share my screen. We did this before and I got it right once and wrong another time. So hopefully I can get it right this time around. Okay, so let's see. Now, what is everyone seeing? Are you seeing a title slide?
Yes.
Awesome, great. Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Scott Sanderson. I'm the interim director of CLF's Farm and Food Initiative, and I just want to thank you so much for inviting me to discuss CLF, the NRC, and LCC's dedelegation petition to EPA. Basically, the petition discusses how Vermont's decision to split jurisdiction over agricultural water quality between the Agency of Natural Resources, or ANR, and the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, or AAFM, is preventing Vermont from fulfilling its obligations under the Federal Clean Water Act. My plan is to chat for about 10 or 15 minutes about the petition, and then after that, I'm happy to answer questions or take part in a general discussion, whatever would be most helpful. So here's a high-level overview so you all know where I'm going. I'm going to start by outlining the status quo and the problem that the dedelegation petition aims to resolve. Next, I'm going to talk about the policy decisions that led to the problems that Vermont is facing. After that, I'll discuss the extensive public records investigation that we engaged in to develop and support the petition. Then I'll outline the petition's findings and what the petition asks EPA to do. And finally, I'll touch on what we expect to happen and when we expect that to happen. Yep, so as I'm sure you already know, Vermont has a plan to restore Lake Champlain that is known as the Lake Champlain Total Maximum Daily Load, or Tmdl for short. And it requires that Vermont reduce phosphorus pollution to the lake. All sectors are responsible for helping Vermont achieve its Tmdl, and agriculture in particular has been asked to make substantial reductions in phosphorus pollution equal to about 143 metric tons per year. Farmers are doing a great job. They're doing their fair share. They've reduced phosphorus loading to the lake by about 33 metric tons per year right now. And over the last decade, farms have achieved the vast majority of Vermont's phosphorus reductions to Lake Champlain. Unfortunately, Vermont's decision to split jurisdiction over agricultural water quality between ANR and AAFM has resulted in basically a long-standing turf war between the two agencies. And today, that rivalry is standing in the way of all the progress and the momentum that farmers have built over time. So how did this turf war come to be, this turf war between these two agencies? So first, it's important to emphasize that the federal EPA is ultimately responsible for implementing the Clean Water Act in Vermont. And that's just because the Clean Water Act is federal law and not state law. EPA, however, is allowed to delegate the administration of the Clean Water Act to a state agency. When they do so, that agency becomes responsible for running a program that meets the Clean Water Act's requirements. And if the agency fails to do that, then EPA has a duty to step in and revoke the agency's authority. So in 1974, EPA granted ANR the authority to administer the Clean Water Act in Vermont, and specifically it authorized ANR to run the Clean Water Act's NPDES permit program. So when that happened, ANR became responsible for exercising control over what are called point sources of pollution and issuing permits whenever necessary. So the first question here is what is a point source under the Clean Water Act? Point sources come in many forms and they exist on all sorts of facilities, including farms. The best and most intuitive example is a pipe that's discharging pollutants directly into a surface water. You know, it's something that you can really just point to and you can see the pollution coming out. But many other things are point sources as long as they carry or collect pollution to a surface water. So for example, a manure spreading vehicle can be a point source and so can a drainage ditch. By contrast, a non-point source is anything that isn't a point source. And the best example in an agricultural setting is a field. Now, in theory, the distinction between point sources and non-point sources is very clear. In practice, particularly in agricultural settings, it can be very unclear. So for example, if nutrients run off a farm field, which I just said was the best example of a non-point source on a farm, whether the resulting pollution comes from a point source or a non-point source can actually depend on whether the pollution runs directly to the surface water from the field, on whether the pollution drains into a ditch before it gets to the surface water, or even on whether the farm is properly implementing its nutrient management plan. The key takeaway here is that the distinction between point sources and non-point sources is a legal construct that doesn't really account for or accommodate the realities of farming. Now, while federal law requires ANR to exercise control over all point source pollution in Vermont, Vermont state law specifically delegates to AAFM the regulation of agricultural non-point source pollution. So in Vermont, ANR handles point sources on farms and AAFM handles non-point sources on farms. The two agencies consequently both need to keep tabs on farms, but because AAFM does most farm inspections, it needs to refer all cases of point source pollution that it identifies to ANR. And ultimately, this means that ANR can only meet its obligations under the Clean Water Act by cooperating and coordinating closely with AAFM. And if the relationship between the two agencies breaks down, then ANR can't do its job and effectively violates the Clean Water Act. So unfortunately, the collaboration between ANR and AAFM has been anything but smooth. As you can imagine, split jurisdiction, the artificial nature of the distinction between point sources and non-point sources, and AAFM's ongoing duty to report point source discharges to ANR have combined to cause friction between the two agencies. They've been fighting about what is and isn't a point source and which agency has jurisdiction over this or that instance of water pollution. Now, these fights are something of an open secret in Vermont and have been for a while. They're referenced in committee hearings all the time. And folks have started to criticize split jurisdiction because it's quite a wasteful example of bureaucracy getting in the way of what really matters. And here what matters is water pollution and also making sure that farmers are dealing with a fair and transparent regulatory system. Nobody really cares in this case whether pollution is coming from a point source or a non-point source. It's really just still water pollution. And the only reason that difference has become really important is because Vermont has split jurisdiction across two agencies based on that distinction. So, and the other thing to note here is, of course, split jurisdiction has resulted in these turf wars and regulatory confusion. So all of this, despite ANR and AAFM, I should say, this turf war continues despite ANR and AAFM entering into 3 successive MOUs to govern their relationship and even hiring consultants to improve their collaboration. Essentially, none of these efforts have worked and the rivalry has kind of chugged along at its own pace. And this is probably why other states don't split jurisdiction this way. They understand that the costs of a split system are conflict, more water pollution, and worse outcomes for farmers. Now, like I said before, ANR and AAFM's rivalry is a bit of an open secret, and so are the problems that it creates. We didn't want to take other people's word for it. Instead, we wanted to see whether there was actual evidence to support what we heard folks saying. So we asked ANR and AAFM for all farm inspection and investigation reports and all correspondence between the two agencies that related to those inspections and to agricultural water quality. We asked for about 4 years worth of these records, which amounted to thousands of pages. And what we found was pretty concerning, and so I'll walk you through some of our findings. I think the first thing is that we learned that split jurisdiction is causing more water pollution and hurting farmers. For example, our records request surfaced a memo written by Secretary of ANR Julie Moore to the Secretaries of the Agency of Administration and the Agency of Human Services. The memo is essentially a plea for Vermont to reconsider split jurisdiction over agricultural water quality. In that memo, Secretary Moore concludes that the distinction between point sources and non-point sources and the split jurisdiction that it has resulted in Vermont have, quote, led to tension and conflict between the agencies, regulatory uncertainty for farmers, and more time-consuming outcomes for water quality, resulting in more pollution. So the second key finding is that farmers are being caught in regulatory crossfire between ANR and AAFM. We heard this referenced many times in public forums last year. For example, one farm leader stated that, or described farmers as being the pinball being batted around between ANR and AAFM. We didn't just see this in these public fora. We also saw examples of this in the records we received from ANR and AAFM. We then have just a series of findings here that I want to quickly talk through. We learned that ANR appears to have concluded many times over the course of the last few years that its relationship with AAFM is preventing it from upholding its duties under the Clean Water Act. That's not just reflected in Secretary Moore's memo, it's also reflected in agency emails, workshops, and sessions with consultants. Further, ANR and AAFM simply disagree on what constitutes a point source. Since the distinction is fundamental to how Vermont regulates agricultural water quality and divides responsibility between ANR and AAFM, the agency's disagreement is quite concerning. Next, we learned that AAFM routinely ignores ANR's right and responsibility under the Clean Water Act to determine whether a point source exists. The important point here is that if the agencies disagree about whether something is a point source, then ANR is supposed to make the final call. AAFM often challenges ANR's right to make that decision or simply makes the decision for ANR without telling ANR. Similarly, AAFM routinely fails to refer evidence of point source discharges to ANR. This simply prevents ANR from controlling those point source discharges as they are required to do under the Clean Water Act. And even when AAFM does refer evidence, they often do so after a significant delay. It's not uncommon for that delay to be measured in months. This matters because what's taking place on the ground on a farm can change very quickly. Delays mean that evidence of point source discharges disappear and ANR really can't do its job. Similarly, AAFM takes a very long time to finalize inspection and investigation reports that ANR relies on. The current MOU that governs ANR and AAFM's relationship requires AAFM to finalize reports within 30 days of an inspection. We found, however, that AAFM averaged 177 days for its 2019 farm inspections, including 17 reports that took more than a year to complete. And last, we learned that about 76% of AAFM farm inspections conducted in 2019 through 2021 document nutrient management plan deficiencies on farms. And this matters because whether a farm is properly implementing its NMP influences whether discharges relating to the application of soil amendments to fields are point source discharges or non-point source discharges. Great. Okay, so what is our request to EPA? So taken all together, these findings generally indicate that ANR is not controlling agricultural point source pollution, which is precisely what the Clean Water Act requires ANR to do. The terrible relationship with AAFM and the turf war make ANR's task impossible. And we believe that this means that ANR's program violates the Clean Water Act and the terms of EPA's delegation of authority to ANR. Our petition consequently asks EPA to start an administrative process that would determine whether or not ANR is in fact violating the Clean Water Act. If ANR is, then our petition asks EPA to require Vermont to take corrective actions, such as transferring all agricultural water quality regulation to ANR. If Vermont declines to fix its program, EPA could step in and run the program itself, but it's worth noting that EPA is very unlikely to actually take over from ANR. These petitions usually result in program improvements and not EPA takeovers. In fact, to my knowledge, EPA has never actually withdrawn a state's authority to administer the Clean Water Act. They've always opted for corrective action of some sort. Then a little bit on the timeline here. The petitions can take a while to run their course. It really varies from dedelegation petition to dedelegation to petition. So we submitted ours just less than a month ago, but we expect meetings between EPA and ANR to begin taking place relatively soon, hopefully at some point in the next couple of months. And when that happens, I think we'll probably end up with a better idea of what a timeline will look like. Any corrective actions that EPA requires, whether they're administrative, legislative, or whatever form they would need to take, would likely be implemented sometime during the next legislative session. But a lot of this timeline stuff is up to EPA, and it's been a while since EPA Region 1, which is the region that Vermont is in, has handled one of these. So let's see. I think that's pretty much the summary of things. And so, yeah, I would be more than happy to take questions.
Thanks. Excuse me. Thank you, Scott. Well, it looks like Denise had a couple questions in the chat. She asked whether a farm ditch can be considered a point source, and also do other states split jurisdiction. I think you noted that no other state splits jurisdiction the way Vermont does, but can you just touch base on point sources on
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, to my knowledge, no other state does split jurisdiction. As far as ditches as point sources go, yes, a ditch can be a point source, and in fact usually is. In fact, expressly within the definition of a point source in the Clean Water Act, I believe. Basically, the key idea with a point source is that the point source collect pollution and channel it. And so, again, like the main idea here is to think of something like a pipe, where you're really able to point out exactly where the pollution is coming from. And it's sort of, you can imagine it as like a concentrated channeled flow. There are some exceptions to this. So, or I should say some things that don't fit that mold. For example, the Clean Water Act also includes a definition for what is called a concentrated animal feeding operation. And it's basically a farm that meets certain size requirements and certain discharge requirements. But on CAFOs, or sorry, they're point source, not just pipes or ditches that run off of it. But yeah, the basic idea is a sort of a concentrated, defined conveyance.
Thanks.
Scott, I don't want to be dense here, but I feel like there may be debate about the ditch thing between AAFM and ANR. Am I mistaken in that? Or I feel like some. So essentially, ANR would have jurisdiction over ditches on farms.
It depends. So what ANR? Yeah. So this is a really good question. So.
Scott, I'm not sure if it's just me, but I'm getting you cutting in and out.
Yeah, he's totally breaking up for me
Okay.
too. I thought it was me, Katie.
Me too.
Okay, Scott, would you mind just cutting your camera? That might help a little bit with the bandwidth.
And maybe stop screen sharing
Yeah.
as well.
Did we lose him altogether, you guys? I thought it was me.
It looks like, yeah, he might be rejoining.
It happened to me too. This is Carol.
I've turned off all the video incoming. There seems to be disrupted bandwidth, so hopefully he can rejoin.
Sorry about that. It looks like my internet dropped out.
Yeah, welcome back, Scott. Yeah, I think if you want to just turn off your video during the question portion, that might help a little bit. And if everybody can just turn off their video for the time being, that might help.
Absolutely. Sorry about that.
No worries.
So we were talking about ditches, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So ditches should fall into the definition of a point source, and basically, if a ditch is conveying or is carrying agricultural waste into a surface water, then my understanding is that yes, ANR would have jurisdiction over that, and that would be a point source discharge.
Denise, did that answer your question? I think
it does. I just don't know that that's what happens in practice, but I'm good with that answer.
That's one of the issues. Carrie, I think you had a question?
I did. Thank you. And thank you for this presentation. This is very helpful. The Lake Champlain Tmdl is, as you all know, the 20-year plan to restore Lake Champlain, at least on the Vermont side, is quite a challenge in and of itself. And much of that does hinge on everyone in every sector doing their part. My fear is that if we don't get it right, if we don't make these corrections, as we should learn from how we're proceeding and make adjustments. And I see this as one of those important adjustments, perhaps. But my fear is that if we fall short on some of the sectors, such as the agricultural sector, and meeting our pollutant reduction targets, the cost will then be borne by all of us ratepayers contributing to our wastewater, public POTWs, wastewater treatment works. And that is incredibly costly. So I think the implications here should not be understated, because of the absolute imperative for us to implement a restoration plan that is as affordable as it can be, as cost effective as it needs to be to achieve our pollutant reductions. And I only want to put this petition in context, because I'd hate to see us just kicking the can down the road, when ultimately at the end of that 20-year period, if we fall short, we all will be paying, and it will be much more costly than we have initially planned for.
Thanks, Carrie. James Maroney, did you have James, before you go, let me have committee members ask their questions. Karina?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I can.
Thank you, Scott. I just had a question regarding tile drains and whether tile drains are considered a point source. And then
oh, sorry. Go for it.
Go ahead.
My understanding is that right now it is a bit of an open debate, and the law is not clear on that. So, I might not be fully up to date on the case law on this, but I believe couple of courts out west have dealt with it or have discussed it in ways that are not really conclusive, particularly in the Second Circuit, which is the circuit that Vermont is in, and that it's a pretty open question in Vermont. Yeah, so the law really isn't clear on it.
Thank you. And I guess my last more of a comment is just curious to hear, like, it seems if other states aren't doing this, that it seems so complicated to have two different agencies managing water quality regulation. So I'm just curious why, like what the concerns are. I would like to hear from the farmers from the Ag Agency and what their concerns are for why they wouldn't want to transfer that. It seems would simplify the process for so many. That's all I have.
Thanks. Next, I think Bob.
Yeah, hi. Just wanted to on Representative Dolan's. Yes, that's in the end. That's what's going to happen. It'll end up on the municipalities and everyone else, because we are obviously clearly NIPD's permit, and that'll be against the climate action plan, which is for building it, into the core service areas, reduce greenhouse gases. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. James Maroney, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Can you hear me?
Yes, thanks.
Thank you, Scott, for that excellent presentation, and thank you to Conservation Law Foundation for taking this project on. If I'm not mistaken, the transfer of authority from ANR to AAFM took place in '93. Isn't that when the original MOU was written?
So I'm not sure on the date of the original MOU. I'd have to refresh my memory, but I will take your word for it on the 93. I didn't do the.
I have that number in my. I have that number in my mind, and I think it was. I think it maybe was amended in '95, but in any case, it's nearly 30 years. And I would like to suggest that the original reason why that transfer of authority was made was not to pursue our water quality objectives, but to shield dairy from efforts to get them to do their share. You began your presentation by saying that the dairy farmers had done an excellent job, and that's politic, and I understand the pressure that they're under. But if I'm not mistaken, I think that Tmdl set out that the lake can take something like 500 metric tons of nutrients, and it's presently getting 800. That's 300 too many, of which 200 is attributable to dairy. Now, dairy, everybody's full of admiration for dairy for achieving 11% or something like 35,000. That's a long way from 200 metric tons, long way. And so I think we really should look with a cold, dispassionate eye on the notion that this transfer did not work. 30 years of trying pretty much tells the story, and the authority must go back to ANR and completely away. The MOU can't be jiggered to make it work. The AAFM's first objective is to shield dairy, not to protect water quality. We need to get away from that mindset entirely.
Thanks, James. James, I know you've done a lot of study in this, and I wonder whether you might know offhand, didn't Second Circuit in Southview conclude that tile drains were point sources? Do you remember that case at all?
I thought if that question is directed at me, Mark,
Yeah.
I mean, I would have thought, once again, that I mean, tile drains are a pipe. I mean, I think tile drains are a point source. I mean, you know, basically what tiling does is transfer or redesign, if you like, a non-point source into a point source. It's more efficient for the farm to move the water off off a field as quickly as possible, and the objective of or the goal of putting in a tile drainage is not to achieve water quality. So I don't know the answer to the question, and I'm amazed that it's that the point is being argued. But I would have thought that also that a wheeled conveyance, according to the Clean Water Act, a wheeled conveyance, and certainly a manure spreader is a wheeled conveyance. That's another point source. So I mean, if we really want to achieve our water quality standards, we have to ANR has to take charge of agricultural pollution, and then the next problem, of course, will be to make sure that ANR does that.
Agreed. Any other questions from committee members?
There was a question from Hillary in the chat. Oh, and she's got her hand up. Go ahead, Hillary.
I was actually going to ask a different question. I guess I'm curious about whether, you know, the efficacy of both of these different state agencies, just in working with them on the ground. You know, I've found Agency of Ag to be very efficient, and certainly farms respond quickly to them when they point out an issue that needs to be fixed. I haven't found, I guess I'm curious, you know, how have the enforcement efforts then gone when they're handed to ANR? Have they been quick? Have they been efficient? You know, have there been changes made?
You know, we didn't dig into ANR's enforcement records to the same extent that we did into AFM's. Right now, the main issue that we're seeing is that ANR is the delegated authority under the Clean Water Act, so they're ultimately responsible for dealing with point source pollution and regulating it, and that this relationship and this split jurisdiction is ultimately making it impossible for them to actually control those point source discharges. So I know that that's not a satisfying answer to your question, but I don't want to speculate too much in that. I haven't gone through 4 years worth of of detailed records on precisely how ANR's enforcements have gone.
I guess I'm not, I assume the objective is to create clean water, which is what we all want. So it might be worth looking at that, I think.
Absolutely.
Any more questions from committee members or any public members that might be on the meeting? Hillary, I think your other question was related to ditches along roads, and certainly along state highway system that falls within VTrans stormwater permits program.
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking about, the miles of unregulated driveway ditches that go into streams, and also with tile drains, we under drain our clean water practices, like our green stormwater practices are under drained. So that, and then directly tied into storm drains. So I just think, it's I think that it'll be about how, are the tile drains sort of like an under drain system where you increase your runoff from the tile drain, which has been filtered through soil, and decrease overland runoff, which is actually just really polluted, as you saw from, the pictures in the presentation. Right. I just think there's a lot of information we don't entirely know yet. And of course, it's hard to make good decisions without all of the information, as we know from past decisions that haven't worked well. So I was curious about that. I've been concerned about driveways and the amount of water in the headwaters that's, dirty water from those type of applications. So it'd be interesting to know if that was a point source. That just creates a really interesting picture in your headwaters.
Yeah, I don't know that I have the answer to the question, but I do. My understanding was that Vermont's response in the context of the TMDL was, more resources directed at the Better Back Roads programs and et cetera to improve those drainage ditches, holding back water, et cetera, as part of their comprehensive response to solutions for reaching TMDL goals. But I don't know case law on whether or not those smaller ditches, road ditches, are point sources. I think likely they are. I guess one last question, Scott, before we're going to move on to our next presentation. And thanks again for your time and bringing this forward. Time-wise, I understand that the administration and neither Ag nor DEC have commented on the petition substantively, and I presume they're waiting until there's these initial meetings with EPA and there's a new regional leadership. So I figure that might take time. Are you anticipating having a meeting within the next 30 days, or is it 60 or 90? Do you have a sense of that?
I'm not entirely sure. So, the way that the regulations work around this leave quite a lot up to EPA's discretion. It's basically one of those things where EPA can set a reasonable timeline, and as long as it isn't, that reasonable timeline could be, 30, 60, 90 days. It just can't be years. Right. But my best guess is that those meetings would start happening in the next couple of months, but I'm not 100% sure. And it really is up to EPA's discretion, within some bounds.
Within, Administrative Procedures Act or some.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. All right,
Yeah.
Thank you. I think I saw Carrie pop her hand up again. Carrie, did you have a comment or a last question? Did I miss that, or was that latent? Okay, there you are.
I guess my one other additional point with respect to this petition is in recognition that we did made some important strides at the last petition. The Agency of Agriculture did adopt a medium and large farm permit, and contained in those are prohibitions to discharge. And I think on paper, they were important steps forward. With respect to the TMDL, we put quite a bit of faith, we being the state, the public, quite a bit of faith in the nutrient management planning process, in recognition that this was and could be a helpful tool for farmers to identify through soil testing the how to manage nutrients on inputs onto their land, and much of that information is confidential, and we operated with good faith, supporting the Agency of Agriculture in using this approach as an important mechanism to address and monitor nutrient inputs. And I say all this because I also wanted to just acknowledge the progress we've made. It's just disappointing that it has to take a petition to conduct a reevaluation of where we are and to take corrective action. I think, though, this is a critically important step for us to learn about how we're going to move forward. And I hope that we can continue to have this on our agenda periodically, so that we can just keep our be aware of the progress I anticipate having us make to take these corrective actions and move forward with a positive outcome at the end of this process.
Thanks, Carrie, for your hopeful optimism. I'm remembering a similar petition or threat of petition regarding the stormwater program when I was a fresh attorney here in the state in the late 90s and into early 2000s. That took a long time to catch up with, and we're still playing catch up with the stormwater program. So I'm hopeful, but thanks again. Scott, I don't think there's any questions, and we dug into a chunk of time for our Streamwise program presentation with Lauren. So thanks again, and perhaps we'll have the opportunity to invite you back when we have a chance to engage the agency of the administration regarding their response. And I think that will probably I can't imagine it happening until after there's been some initial EPA meetings. So we'll wait and see when there's activity there. So thanks again, I appreciate it. And we'll move on now to catch up on some time and move to Lauren Jeunesse from the Basin Program on the Streamwise Award Program. Thanks, Lauren.
Yeah, and thanks, Mark. Hi, everyone. My name is Lauren Jeunesse, and I work for the Lake Champlain Basin Program. I'm also joined by Matt Haywood of the Image Farm. Matt, if you want to turn on your screen and give a little wave.
Should be coming on here.
Yeah, hi.
Oh, it's funny. I was just waiting to see myself like usual.
So I'm going to share my screen now for the presentation, and I know we were having some connectivity issues before, so let me know if I need to turn off my camera. And let me just try to find you all again. Okay, great. So can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Katie. All right, so beginning this summer, Streamwise will be bringing neighbors together to protect and restore healthy waterways across the Lake Champlain Basin. And Matt and I will be providing you with an overview of the new program and also giving you a sneak peek of the new website that's about to be launched. So thank you for inviting us to present about this program, and we're happy to come back and provide you with updates about how it's going. So this project, it was first conceptualized in a Lake Champlain Basin Program fiscal year 2019 Education and Outreach Task Description submitted by Will Eldridge and Karen Bates at Vermont Agency of Natural Resources. And then it was approved for funding by the Lake Champlain Steering Committee. They envisioned a program that could be used to educate and incentivize communities to engage in riparian stewardship activities with a consistent marketing message and brand, modeled after the successful Lakewise Award program in Vermont. So an RFP for the work to develop the program was released in March 2020 by the Basin Program. And the project contract was awarded to a great project team who has shepherded us along the way throughout this work. And it was Dana Allen at Fluid State Consulting, along with Holly Greenleaf of Greenleaf Designs, and Matt and Pam Haywood at the Image Farm. And so throughout the presentation, they are known as the project team. Okay. So the project team, they work closely with the project's advisory committee, which was composed of federal, state, and provincial partners who would provide input on the program development and improve all of the work products. And also with 10 local community partners who are watershed groups and conservation districts, and they would likely be the groups on the ground who would do the Streamwise Award programming. And so I want to say a great big thank you to all of the partners who helped us develop the program to date, as well as to the 6 partners who will be helping the Lake Champlain Basin Program pilot the program this summer. And so Friends of the Winooski River is going to be piloting the program in the Winooski River watershed in Vermont. The Sable River Association is going to be piloting the program in the Sable watershed in New York. OBVBM is piloting the program in the Quebec portion of the Missisquoi Bay. And we have Vermont Lake Champlain Basin-wide work being done with Watersheds United Vermont and Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department. And Lake Champlain Sea Grant is supporting the basin program as well in our pilot year with a comprehensive basin-wide approach to the program. So to develop the program between 2020 and now, the project team led us all in 3 main phases of program development. And the first phase was to establish a foundation and a resource library. And the major outcome of that work was the resource library that pulled together rules, regulations, ongoing programs across the basin and beyond into an Excel database with over 150 resources. And everything was compiled into a 51-page summary to give the project advisory committee and the project partners a good sense of what's already taking place and current rules and regulations. The second phase of program development was to solicit feedback and build the program outline. And so the main output of that, after a series of meetings over the course of the year, was an outline of the assessment protocol and evaluation criteria. The next step in the program development was phase 3, which was the building out the brand and communications plan. And the Image Farm and Greenleaf Designs led this phase of the project. And what came out of it was a series of great meetings, and we set the tone and the feel of the program. And the outputs included, but are not limited to, a social media kit, logos, graphics, and photos that can be used by all of the partners. And then in addition to those 3 steps of the program development work, we also provided funds for the development of a website, which you'll preview soon. The creation of a fulcrum application to collect data online in the field instead of using paper data forms, as well as a desktop assessment atlas that can be used during the pre-field visit phase to get a sense of if someone is interested in Streamwise and they want someone to go out onto their property, you can use this screening tool to give you an overview sense of what's happening on the property before you actually go and interact directly with the landowner. And then we're also, to make the program regional and responsive across the basin, we're translating all of the material into French currently. And we'll be posting all of those updated materials on a French version of the website as well. So what is Streamwise? We see Streamwise as a basin-wide, valuable, voluntary, and inclusive tool, part awareness campaign and part assistance resource that can be used in partnership with watershed organizations, conservation districts, and other water quality groups to inform and recognize private landowners across the Lake Champlain Basin that maintain wide buffers of native plants along the sections of rivers and streams that they own. It's not a replacement for on-the-ground work, programs, or partnerships that are already in place and working well. Rather, Streamwise provides the tools, connections, messaging, and resources needed for our partners to work with their local stream community in a new way, to provide outreach and consistent messaging, and do the circular 5-step Streamwise process that you see on the screen, which includes conducting outreach to spread the word about the program and engage with property owners to participate in the program, to perform site assessments, including both the desktop pre-assessment and the field visit. The field visit provides both the property assessment and key messaging and resources that the person conducting the assessment can share with the property owner. provide a certificate of participation with targeted recommendations and technical assistance, or award the property with a Streamwise award if they meet the criteria within the program. And then also communicate next steps for technical assistance and involvement with the program. And then a continuous follow-up and then outreach and circle back feedback loop to make sure that participating landowners stay engaged and involved with the program and that the program continues to grow over the years. So what with Streamwise are we trying to create? We're trying to create wide buffers that are native and naturally vegetized with multi-tier canopies and minimal impervious surface. It's an inclusive and educational campaign. The three primary criteria that Streamwise assessors would look for on an individual property can be categorized into buffer width, buffer zones, and buffer vegetation. And here is the Streamwise award that property owners can be awarded, as well as the certificate of participation, which would list what's good things about their buffer currently, and then what could be improved and how to improve it, along with technical assistance provided and communication and messaging resources. So now I'm going to hand it to Matt. If you want me to click through the slides, Matt, let me know, and he'll go into more depth about the branding and communications work of Streamwise. Matt, are you still here?
Forgot to unmute.
Okay.
Classic. So yeah, I'll keep this really short and then show you the website preview as well, because we'll see a bunch of the branding work sort of in play already. So next slide, please. So like Lauren said, the program is very peer-to-peer, so we'll need to be spreading the word on social media, as well as on the ground, and we'll be setting up an Instagram and Facebook and YouTube account each for Streamwise that LCBP will manage those. I won't say day to day, but week to week. So next slide. So again, we created quite a bit of materials and tools for assessors to use the partner program. The style guide gives sort of sets the tone, establishes consistent branding with logos and fonts, colors, and things like that. Social media kit is a jumping off point, again, largely for our work with LCBP, but also for partners to communicate through social media, by sharing certain hashtags that we recommend, and we've given some sample ideas for posts and things like that. We also created several outreach materials. Some we'll need right away, like this award sign, and everyone who participates in the program, a landowner will get a certificate with, if they get an assessment, they'll get, that certificate will have next steps right on it. And again, the social media accounts are in progress, and our website is very much in progress. And we'll see that shortly. Next slide. Again, we're trying to reach people in several ways on the web, social media. We'll also be setting up and or recommending setting up within Lake Champlain Basin programs existing system Streamwise campaigns to keep that message pretty targeted. And then obviously analytics to track things and see how they're doing and make adjustments. All this is really but it very much supports what's going on the ground. Those site assessments, these tools will be used in those. There's language and messaging included in the materials that helps partners talk to landowners, property owners. And then, we could see branded materials being used around events like gatherings or green up days, things like that. There might be freebies and handouts, and then print will come into play probably at some point. Nothing is immediate right away, but surveys, posters, announcing events, things like that. Next slide, please. So the website, we want to keep it up to date. All this, keep it current. Website should get updated pretty regularly with news posts. Social media and the website can link back and forth to each other is good practice. Putting out a teaser of a longer article on social and then driving people to the web. Email can function that way as well, or email can be a long form. It kind of depends on the audience. And again, watching things to see how they're doing and adjust if they need to. Next. Okay.
So yeah, so for screen share, maybe I'll just finish up with a slide of next steps, and then you could take it away with the website. So working with our pilot year partners who have agreed to test run this program and see how we can improve it for full launch into the basin. So we're going to be doing a series of 3 different trainings in June and then July time period. The Streamwise pilot year partners will be implementing Streamwise in the watersheds they serve throughout the summer into October. And then all of the partners who participate in the pilot year will be meeting in November to see how the first year went and make any adjustments and recommendations for the program moving forward. And with that, I'll stop sharing my screen and let Matt show you the awesome website he put together.
Right. Oh, and of course it's gone now. Oh. Yeah, that's why. Okay, so you should now be seeing Streamwise and Reeve development site. So this will live at streamwisechamplain.org. This is a temporary site or location. So this is the home page. I'll just kind of give us the experience here. So the first section, I'll go back up here. I guess I'll give a little. I'll steer us through, but this leads to our about page, kind of an intro here, and just introducing the idea of landowners being a key component, or not component, but audience. We also have, there's quite a bit of material that you could do on your own without getting expert help from, say, a watershed organization. So there's quite a few tools for property owners that they could do on their own, kind of a varying level of skill level, depending on how much you want to tackle. Like Lauren said, Streamwise is regionally responsive, so this here links to all the tools for the partners. And again, English has been uploaded, but French is being translated. And here's our news section. These are placeholder articles at the moment. You'll see some Greeking here, but the topics are a starting point. And again, this is a place to keep things moving and keep the content really fresh. Maybe the section might even move up eventually. You can announce projects, new partners, landowners if they want to be notified or acknowledged, and a sign up section for that newsletter that'll come here, acknowledging our partners here, including the entire phase 1 group. And again, so now I'll go back up here. So if we go to our About page, Again, talking about engaging Streamwise, streamside property owners. We're trying to keep the language non-technical. You know, even the word riparian, we're trying not to use too much, particularly in the beginnings of pages and about pages, things like that. You know, land along streams is much more easy to understand, streamside, things like that. And, you know, this all came up during phase 1, and we're, you know, this website's an immediate opportunity to kind of refine it even more and, you know, make sure we set the right tone. So, you know, there's a little call to action here and sort of sprinkled throughout. There's the mission statement, valuable, voluntary, inclusive. And then this is a great little section of really kind of summarizing the big ticket items, like, or not ticket, but the big items that will have a lot of impact. So this is all, you know, public information. Everything really is publicly accessible, at least so far. We talked about password protection, but it doesn't maybe seem necessary. I think if people get into the more complex things, they'll sort of glean that it's not necessarily for them directly. So again, we've got tools for property owners, you know, quite a collection of guides and management resources, stormwater, shorelines, other programs. DE Lakewise has been really successful. You know, we have internet things from Quebec, and, you know, sort of steering people to the right resources on some pretty deep websites here from the partners. Invasive species is important, so there's links, you know, to specific agencies and policies to deal with that, depending on where you are in the region. Again, another call to action to kind of get people to sign up if they do own land with a stream or a long one. And still even more, you know, collection of knowledge about all these things that are going to help improve waterways, down to managing roads. I heard better roads mentioned as I got on the meeting. So, and then for the Streamwise teams, this page outlines the process and then provides all the documentation and tools that you'll need. The protocol, the atlas, the app. There's some videos on using the app. Something weird about that image, but the certificate that you could download and use. The award sign, this will go through Lake Champlain Basin Program because they'll produce some signs to start. Style guide, again, to help set the branding tone, social media kit, and then some really nitty-gritty things like logo files and photos, graphics. These two sections aren't quite ready yet. This is a table that right now, it's the resource library that is on lcbp.org right now. That'll move over to this site. And then a similar format of a sortable table with a a matrix essentially of all the organizations that are available to help, and it's can be organized by watershed or by county, so it's kind of easy to search in multiple ways. The news page, again, trying to get people to sign up and stay current, learn about events, things like that. And just some starter articles, and Basin Program and partners are going to help finish these out. We want to, announce the launch, again, reinforce what Streamwise is and why it's so important and what you could do. And then again, these things can sort of steer people back in within the site. They could link out to other articles, and over time that news section will fill out. And as it does, we might add categories and things like navigation to help a visitor search through if it starts to get filled in. Contact page, of course. email form, but then we also want to sort of gather what some people's interests are, to sort of prompt them maybe in their message. And that, I think, is about it. Socials are not set up yet, so I'm not going to go there. I'll pop us back to the homepage, or sorry, homepage. Here we go. And that is the preview.
Thanks, Matt, so much.
Yeah.
We're able to answer any questions people have about the program. It's really exciting to see that we're almost ready to launch the website and everything and test it out with our pilot year partners. And I guess I'll just add that we at the Basin program, we hope to use our basin-wide and regional network of partnerships to keep the tools pages and resource pages up to date. So if there's a new version of a manual or a new manual or report, that the Streamwise website stays current and up to date and as a good resource for everybody in the basin.
Excellent. Thanks, Lauren. Matt, is there any questions from anyone? Lauren and Katie, you'll share your presentation. Oh, Hillary, there you go.
I just wanted to compliment you on that resource, those resources that were compiled. We keep a lot of those copies of things, of those items in our office to hand out to people. And I feel like having everything online and not paper copies and being able to hand out that link will be incredibly helpful. So thank you for your, I guess, completeness of the research on that. That's amazing.
Thanks, Hillary. That's such good feedback as well. Thank you.
I was just going to add, this is Denise, and I used to run a watershed nonprofit up here in Franklin County, and I feel like what you guys just presented is amazing, and I think it's such a great resource, and I think people are going to be really, I think they're just me jumping at it. I think it's really well presented. I like the language you're using. I like how inclusive is in one of your values, and that you keep repeating it, and that you're not using the word riparian, because most people don't know what that means. So I just want to say I really appreciate the language that you're using and how you've approached this project to be really approachable and inclusive. So thank you.
Thanks, Denise.
Thanks for the feedback.
And this is Karina, and I totally agree. And this is something that has come up as an idea in circles that I've been working with, is why we have a Lakewise, why don't we have a Streamwise? So I'm so excited that it's happening, and yeah, looking forward to the rollout.
Thanks, Karina.
Yeah.
And I'll say Matt and Pam, they really brought I mean, the whole project team brought a great value to the program, but having them work through us, and it was a subgroup of the project advisory community and phase one partners to walk through exactly, what are the pillars of Streamwise, what should the look and feel of the logo be. We had a lot of conversations about colors and tone and everything. And yeah, it was really great to get us to where we are with the program today. So I want to thank you, Matt, for helping us in that process too.
Yeah. And I'll just say thanks to all the experts that created all this content. It's we're helping to kind of sift through it and put a tone on it, but really it's the content of what the reason it's there, and we're trying to portray that it's really evidence backed, and these are best practices, and it's not just like something simple. We're trying to show that it can be simple, but it's quite detailed underneath.
Terry?
I too just want to give a big shout out and a fantastic presentation for a really exciting endeavor. So I just wanted to add my few cents there to compliment you. It's truly, truly wonderful to hear about.
Thanks.
Thanks.
thanks again. Really great work. And I agree. I think people will be really excited to use it. It's just very approachable. And like Denise says, not language that scare people away. What are we talking about as we're trying to help the lake and our streams? So thanks again, Lauren. We'll look for your presentation and the link. Work with Carol, have it posted on the website for committee members and the public, and really awesome. We've got just well, I guess we got right back on schedule. So thanks again for that, Lauren.
You're welcome.
We have a couple of things we want to talk about as we wrap up. 2 upcoming meetings would be May 9th and then again on June 13th. We had some thoughts in our past meeting to get some follow-up related to our legislative action plan day. And 2 items that came up from committee members were to get a better understanding on whether we had any effectiveness in advocating for, I guess, revitalizing the budget in the at ANR, Vermont ANR, for their aquatic invasive species program. And the second item that was requested related to the DEC Ag MOU and some improvements in the process that were shared by the governor's deputy chief of staff, Brittany Smith, and didn't have time to get much detail during the action plan day, but we thought we'd like to get a little more detail, and perhaps it can be linked with perhaps some follow-up from the agencies on the petition and any maybe preliminary response. As I noted, they might want to wait until after they've had some discussions with EPA. So I guess this is a call for other topics. Where do we go from here for our next few meetings? Are there issues that committee members have heard and things have come up that they'd like some more follow-up on or like some more detail on that we could try to engage before we move on to planning for our retreat in July? And I think our last successful retreat was up at the Basin program, and it might be nice to try to do another in-person session in on or near the lake before we take a break for the rest of the summer and plan for the next biennium as we've discussed in the past. So I thought I just saw a couple hands pop up. Did Bob or sorry, my computer's a little bit slow responding. Was there Denise?
Yeah, one thing that I'm just curious about is, you know, as we start to look at cities and towns in our communities that have wastewater infrastructure, you know, there's stormwater permits for many of them, and I'm just curious, you know, the mitigation strategies as we start to do infill within those communities. And I don't know if anybody can speak to that, if, you know, I don't know if it's a municipal thing or Vermont Leagues of Cities and Towns, but thinking about stormwater, or my daughter's playing me as I'm blabbering.
You know, Denise, thanks for that. I had a couple conversations in the last few weeks, and it occurred to me that there's, you know, one part of the brain trust available. Well, 2 parts of the brain trust available actually exist on this committee, and I wondered whether we might be able to engage committee members to talk about the CSO treatment plant and stormwater issues, and between Bob's experience and Jeff's experience in Rutland and perhaps Megan Moore's experience in Burlington, possibly St. Albans too, to bring in, but we might be able to have a really good conversation around sort of that status and what are the issues. I know, Bob brought it up again today. The Climate Action Plan really requires us to focus on building in, and there's been some challenges and issues with that related to capacity and what do the impacts of that look like. So I think we might be able to pull off a nice sort of collaborative discussion if we can get Bob and Jeff and Megan and maybe one or two others. I'm not sure whether a panel at our retreat or maybe in our June meeting, we might be able to put some time towards that if you think that gets some of the answers you're looking for.
I'm sure I'd be willing to, but I also like to mention Wayne because
Right.
he gets around a lot more than I do. I know the larger municipalities, but Wayne actually touches a lot of the smaller municipalities throughout the state. And since he's on the on the CAC, he should.
So
he can take me later.
That's true. He's left the meeting today, but thanks for reminding me. I think that Wayne might have been doing some work for some time on the recently approved Colchester system around the Lakeshore Drive there. So that's a good. Lori?
Yeah. Thanks. I think it would be great to have presentations on stormwater. I think we should keep, just as since we've put out a position on it, we want to keep the Round Goby Canal Corps response on our agenda, because also it sounds like there's going to be more information being gathered about the approach right now, and we want to just, we've called for closure of that lock, so I think we want to just stay on top of that and keep having a short update on that to see if we need any more action on our part and not lose the schedule.
Certainly. Yeah, I expect we'll have the opportunity to grab Meg again for just some continued updates, as she's literally in the weeds on that. Any other items? I mean, the petition and continuing to follow up on that. That's been going on for a decade for us as an issue, and hopefully the petition will press for improvements in the program and some resolution in the turf war, as it was described. Any other ideas or thoughts? I have a different question. Are folks beginning to, I know it's convenient to meet online, but I wouldn't mind meeting in person. Is June or July, do you think people might be willing to have an in-person meeting by then? Carol?
Well, I find that having this meeting remotely is spectacular, because it allows me to be here just for the time of the meeting, and it's just great. And I'm close to where we usually meet, so for those who have to travel a long distance, I think this is a great thing. I think for a retreat, I definitely think we should get together. Okay. And you wear masks, actually, because we'll be in close proximity for so long, or take a test right beforehand. I don't know. I was just exposed last week, and the person thought they only had a cold and was testing negative, and now tested positive, and now, so I hate to be in a situation where, we could pass COVID on to each other. It seems like unnecessary. So that's That's what I would just say is maybe we get together for our you know what I'm saying. We get together for our retreat, but be remote otherwise.
I appreciate that. I agree. It seems to be spreading again, and other staff have had it, so it's a still an issue. Unless there's other comments, I'll sort of take that as consensus that we'll try for the July retreat in person with appropriate protective protocols. So, Denise, is your hand up?
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, I think it is convenient to be able to do these on Zoom. I do miss the in-person meetings as well. I think there's a lot that's shared when people convene in a space together. If there's a way to do it, I mean, we're doing this with, city planning commission meetings, doing hybrids, and it seems to be working pretty well. And it's been nice because the public can get on the Zoom links and not have to feel like they have to show up in person.
Right.
So just something to kind of advocate for if there's a possibility of doing that. But I do like the convenience of doing it from my car or my home or wherever I happen to be for an evening meeting, especially with kids. So.
Okay. And I think I saw Bob had his hand up quickly.
Lori had hers up too, I think.
Yeah, I agree with
Lori.
all. Just you addressed everything I was going to say. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? We've reached our 7 o'clock. There's still a bit of time for folks to get outside and enjoy the blue sky and the sunshine before it disappears. And then looks like some cold, snowy weather coming, I saw. So hopefully we'll move fully into spring sooner. If there's nothing else, thanks again, everyone, for joining us this evening, and look forward to seeing you all again on May 9th. And as always, if there's anything, please don't hesitate to reach out to Katie or Denise or I for meeting topics as we're planning towards the July retreat.
Thanks, everyone.